All right, good evening. So in this session, we're going to talk about the early contact initiative streams, and more specifically about tactical and systems objective section of the seasonal plan templates. So very briefly, just want to kind of give a little bit of background. Like for those of you who were here last week when we did the session about a seasonal plan, we're not going to go over everything. Obviously, we're really going to focus on that one section. And that one section is important, just as the rest of your seasonal plan, because it's really important at the beginning of the season that you know where you're going, right? So you're gonna get your team, and you need to kind of set some objectives in terms of where you want to be at the end of the season. You can do that before you really know your players, or you can do that after you really know your players. And if you do it before, you're likely going to adjust your end of season objectives anyways. So it doesn't matter. But the important thing is that you start thinking about that, and that you have a really good idea of where you want to end the season. And not in terms of ranking, but in terms of what your athletes are going to be able to do, right? So, okay, we're going to be able to pass with our forehands. We're going to be able to pass the entire court with 3 players, for example, if we're playing 6-on-6, or we're going to play a 6-2 by the end of the season if we are in traditional and specialized. So those are kind of examples of objectives that you could set for your team. And once you know where you want to end, well, then by using your seasonal plan, as you develop it, you can plan backwards and kind of fill the gap between where your athletes are now and where your athletes are, where you want them to be at the end. Okay, so that's what we've done for you with the seasonal plan templates. And then I'm going to share my screen in a second, and I'll walk you through them if you have not seen them yet. But yeah, essentially knowing where you want to be is the entire purpose of this section. Now, I just want to mention that tonight I'm going to share my perspective. So I built those season plan templates, and I did it by keeping in mind some principles of long-term athlete development. And so it didn't just come out of nowhere. There's definitely some thinking and thoughts behind that, and like I said, some I don't want to say science, but definitely a lot of information pulled from some important documents such as the LTD. So I want you to keep that in mind, and because it's not what I'm going to present tonight is not the best way to do things. I think it's a very good way to do things. It may not be appropriate for your athletes. This template was made with kind of the average 4v4, 6v6, and traditional and specialized teams in mind. So it is possible that for a specific stream, your team is not ready for what I'm going to present tonight, or that your team is past that. But hopefully through discussion, it gives you some ideas of how you can adjust the plan to fit the needs of your team. Okay. So if you have any questions about that, right, you feel like your team is not there yet or is ahead, please feel free to ask any questions. I actually look forward to that piece of that part of this session. I'm hoping you guys have a lot of questions. It's going to make it really interesting. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen right here, and okay. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to start with 4v4, and then we're going to make our way up to traditional and specialized. And the thing I want to start with, well, as you see, this is the seasonal plan template. Okay, we went through it last week, and we're going to really focus on this section right here. Okay, so how do we set up these objectives? What does that mean? What do all of these terms mean? I assume some of you may know, some of you may not. So I want to go through that and take the time to explain everything. Okay, so as you can see here, we have our calendar. Okay, in green here, just a reminder, these are our competitions. And for most of this plan, our competitions serve as landmarks for us to kind of start shifting our tactics and systems. Okay, so you will see this throughout all 3 streams. Yeah, so we got our calendar here, and here we have the objectives that we're going to focus on for this one stream. So with 4v4, obviously we have 4 athletes on court, so it's going to impact kind of the types of tactics and systems that we can implement, but we'll get into that. So I'm not going to start by the very top here. I'm actually going to start by the last 3 here. Okay, the last 3 points. And why? Well, because those are, well, they're in my opinion, very important performance objectives for young athletes. Okay, and this is going to be something that is going to apply to everything, right? Whether you play with a setter in position 3, okay, or if you, no matter how you serve and how you serve receive, these are things that you're going to want to do across like throughout the entire year. So those are interesting to me, okay, because it can be tracked with stats, right? And I'm going to explain what each of them is. Okay, so essentially for the early contact streams, as we have our athletes come in and learn to play the game, I like to have athletes focus on learning to play the game the way it's supposed to be played. All right, so in volleyball, we have 3 contacts. So let's try to have our athletes do 3 contacts as much as possible. And let's celebrate that, right? So doing 3 contacts on the ball is going to be part of our objectives for the season, okay? Setting with our hands is going to be an objective for the season. With the little boys, little girls, oftentimes they will find it easier to set with their forearms because they have more strength, they have more power with their forearms. Maybe they're not strong enough with their hands. They feel they can, send the ball a little further, or they may think that they can't get under the ball, or they may just not want to move their feet, or maybe they're not able to read the ball and get under the ball. And that could be very true because just as an anecdote, I recently did a session with some Team Ontario setters from 17 and 18U, and almost all of them, when I asked them what they wanted to work on, said that they wanted to get better at getting under the ball. Okay, so definitely a skill that is difficult. So it is possible that your young players find it difficult and they can't get under the ball, and then they start, using your forearms to set. So I like to encourage them to use their hands and set objectives around that. And lastly, attacking on the 3rd contact. Okay, so we see that a lot also with young players, where players don't want to make the mistake. They don't want to be costing a point to their team. So they'll be a little tentative, and sometimes they'll prefer setting the ball over because they don't want to make a mistake, or they're not too sure what to do, or they're going to bump the ball over. While attacking on 3rd contact is obviously very important in volleyball. As soon as possible, we want to be smashing that ball, attacking it with power, getting the ball into the court, and scoring some points. That's the whole goal of our game, right? So getting 3 contacts, having the second one be done with your hands, and getting the 3rd contact with an attack, to me, are 3 very, very important performance objectives that I like to have at every level of these of early contact. So we're going to see those come back in each of the season plan templates. Okay, and so what those numbers are here, well, they're essentially the percentage of time that we're going to do this with our team. Okay, so in terms of at the end of the year, okay, those are the numbers that that we'd like to see. Okay, so the number that you see here in black, because we're playing at 4v4, we're playing triple ball rules. So that means we will have 1 serve and then 2 free balls coming, and then we're going to have our rallies, right, in between all of that. Well, the number in black represents the target for when, essentially for all rallies. Okay, so when we have our serve and when we're in rally. And the number in red represents the target for when we are in serve receive. So you'll notice that the number in red is always a little higher than the number in black for each section of our season. And that's just because the free ball situation is a very controlled situation, and so we can expect a higher rate of success in in that phase of the play. All right. So when you're reading this, well, if we go at the end, because this is again where we want to be at the end of the season, we know that we're going to want to be at 90% of the free balls that we get. We're doing 3 contacts on them before we put it over. And when we're in rally, either on the serve or at any other point in the rally, we want to be at about 80%. Okay, you have 3 contacts. Same numbers here for hand setting and for attack on third. So, and the thing that I really like about setting those is they're very objective measures, and it's a good way to start introducing your players to statistics. Okay, we know that as we go further into volleyball, stats are a very important part of the game, not just to assess your players and how they play, but also to assess your opponents and try to figure out their weaknesses and their strengths. So stats are something that we're going to use as we grow into more experienced volleyball players. So it's good to be introduced to them early. Now, these performance indicators here are good because they're not about the individual's essentially skills. Okay, so it's a team stat, and everybody contributes to it. It's not threatening for a young player because we're not saying, well, you missed your serve 50% of the time and then you made it 50% of the time or whatever. So it's not a stat that the athletes will feel is a judgment on their individual performance. It's something that actually the team can gather around and really say, hey, we're going to try to get to this number today. And you can really motivate your players to to achieve these numbers, because once you start talking about them, and let's say you're early in your season and your target here is 70%, but you got to 68 or whatever, then we can talk to your players and they can get really, really excited about getting that last 2%. Okay, and it allows you to get them to focus on those things that are going to be really helpful for them to play the game better, right? So I wanted to show you how tracking this could look like. Okay, so I also want to provide you with some tools. So here's an example of what it could look like. Okay, to do this, so you could get yourself a little chart like this where you print that onto a sheet of paper, and you can either do it at your games or you can film your games, do it after. You can ask your players to track it if you trust them. You can ask them to do it, and you have an assistant coach who does it as well. So they, learn how to observe the game and understand what's going on and see opportunities where perhaps they could have attacked on third, but they didn't, right? So they get to observe that because they pay attention to it. And then you do it yourself, or you ask an assistant coach to do it so that you get the perhaps better numbers or more accurate numbers. But, you could track everything on here. So for example, this is very easy because as you're watching the play unfold, right away, okay, there were 3 contacts here. There was a hand set, there was an attack. Boom, I put an X here. Okay, there was 3 contacts, there was a hand set, no attack, it's here, and so on. And you can kind of track every type of situation in these 5 boxes. And then I'm going to pretend here that we have some numbers. Let's say we had, 7 here. We had 4 in which we bumped over. Then on the ones where we didn't set with our hands, we bump set. We were able to do some attacks because we're really aggressive. And a couple of times we did no attacks. And it happened like 3 times that we did 1 or 2 contacts. So either we put the ball over because we didn't know what to do with it, or something like that. And so we got 3 of them. And once you do something like this, you build your, and I'm happy to actually add this sheet to the seasonal plan template that is on the website. But this actually calculates all of your stats, and you can see whether or not you're close to your objectives. Okay, so no, I did one. You can probably easily do one yourself if you know Excel a little bit. Again, I'm happy to add this to our website, but this is an example of how you can easily track this. And again, tracking these numbers will be a great way to engage your players in kind of how they play the game. It will allow you to discuss the advantages of playing with 3 contacts, not just for now, but for later in their career as volleyball players. And same thing for hand setting and attacking on third. Now, I will say that the 4v4, actually every stream of early contact, if you've looked at the schedule and the way the tournaments are going to happen, not all tournaments count towards results. So if you feel that it's too stressful for your athletes to try to achieve some of those objectives on a tournament where there's a ranking, at play, well, you will have opportunities to do that in tournaments that don't necessarily. Okay, I would say that you need to start tracking these and have a discussion with your players every single time you get on the court, because at the end of the day, you don't win by just thinking about winning. You win by playing the game well, and you play the game well by doing these things, right? But yeah, so you'll have lots of opportunities to work on these with your players. I see some questions. I'll go to the chat before I move on to the next line here. Okay, so are the measurements for tracking just in tournament play? So yes, those are. So it's a great question, Allison. Really, really good question. So you could track this and these numbers at practice, so that you have a better idea of how you're kind of progressing, because there's quite a few weeks between some of your events. Right, your first event here is November 1st, and then you're going all the way to December 13th. So you may want to assess as part. You may want to play a little game in your practice, let's say on the week of November 22nd, to see where you're at, to see like, hey, we have 3 weeks now before our next event. Are we on the right track? Right. So you can definitely do that in practice. Now, these, as part of a season plan, the way I usually build my season plan is that those are stats that I'm going to want to see at the event, because it's kind of where you really test where you're at, right? The events are there to test your training, to see if you can implement the stuff that you've trained, if it transfers. So I like to measure where my team is at our events. And it's also because when it counts at the end of the season, when we want to peak and have our best performance and achieve our best results at provincials, well, we'll be in a competitive situation. So it's good to test these in a competitive situation. Kevin asks, how do you come up with those percentages? Very good question. So I coached a 13U to 16U team a few years back, and I did this where I tracked those numbers. So I went back and looked at it and what my team was doing and kind of what targets I had. And so I made those up from that. Okay. So they will have to be tested. And I look forward to have some discussions with some of you who will track these numbers to see if they need to be adjusted. But again, this is a template. And let's say these end up being wrong and too difficult to achieve, for example, or not difficult enough. This is something you are going to find out, right, as you go through the season and you test these things. So if you realize that there's no way that we're getting to 70% by December 13th, well, you can feel free to adjust those targets and let your players know. And there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, you're really encouraged to do that and assess your players and adjust. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is our objective here and it's really ambitious, but you know what? Maybe we end up here at the end of the season at 70, 80 instead. No problem with that. Charlie asks, what about when the opposing team serves and your team shanks the ball out of play? Okay, so that is again, great question, Charlie. I would not count this in the stats. So if someone aces us, that would be part of a different statistics, right? So you could, if you wanted to, start taking stats about serve receive and how good you serve receive. So you could stat, for example, we had a perfect pass, an average pass, or we were aced, right? Or any other type of like tracking system that you want for your serve receive. And that would be a stat that I track there. Now with 4v4, I'm sure you could find a reason to track the quality of your serve receive. I personally wouldn't, just because I know that my players are they're learning, and I would want them to focus on different things. You know, I would probably, instead of tracking the quality of the pass, I would probably set objectives around we were stopped at contact, for example. Hey girls, how many times today in the game are we going to be stopped or balanced when we pass the ball, for example, right? With like our feet nice and stable, and then our arms and platform stable, for example. We're going to count. And when they try to do it 50% of the time, right? That's probably what I would set my objectives around. I would make them very process oriented and not so result oriented, especially with the little ones. Just again, because they're learning and they're in that phase of their development where they have everything to learn. I would really focus in on it so that they're not always like worried about the outcome, right? Because that's when they stop focusing on like improving their technique and all that stuff. So do you consider down balls as free balls? You could. That could be up to you. Like you could maybe differentiate between kind of an attack or a down ball and count the down ball coming during a rally. You could count it as part of this red one. Personally, I like to just like split it, just because I like to see how we do in like a very, very controlled and blocked situation, such as the free ball phase of triple ball. So thanks for your questions, guys. That's awesome. So I'll get back to this for now, and I'll come back to the chat a bit later. So these three lines here, they come back in every single plan for the 3 streams. Okay, so you'll see them. I'm not going to go through them again. The numbers are the numbers, but yeah. So that's why I wanted to kind of go over this. What's going to change between the different seasonal plans is going to be what's in those sections here up above. Okay, grab some water. Okay, so let's get into this. At this point, please feel free to ask questions. If there's a term that's not clear to you, I will be happy to clarify things. Okay, so for 4-on-4, I've laid out 4 system objectives here that I think would be interesting to work on with your team. Now, keep in mind that I've never coached a 4-on-4 team. I want to be very clear about that. This is brand new, so this is going to be just as new for me than it is for you. But here's what I would do, okay? And that's why I wanted to warn you at the beginning that this is my opinion based on my best knowledge and best thinking. But please feel free to adapt and take it for what it is. Okay. So here's what I would do. I think that by the end of the season, right, I would like to have my setters comfortable trying front and back sets. Maybe not all the time, but at least a little bit. Okay. And that will be a little easier on a 4-on-4 court because it's going to be smaller, right? We're not talking about a full 9x9 court, right? We play on a 7x7, so it's going to be easier for them to be able to set a ball back and still get a hitter, right? How we're going to get there? Well, I know that they're not going to be able to do that, from the get-go. So we're going to start with front sets, okay? So what I would do is, for the first 2 events, I'd probably have my setter in position 3, so they phase a set. Now, I've discovered a new trick, and I'm going to try here with you tonight, okay, to see if I can show you this. So, awesome. Okay. So, the formation that I would use for 4-on-4 is probably one where I've got my setter here in 3. Actually, why don't I just go setter? Okay, that'd be my setter. Then I'd have 3 other players over here. Okay. And so at the beginning, I'd have my setter in position 3, probably just facing the serve receive. And then, depending on where they want to set, I'd have them, really turn, okay, and then set in front of them, right? And then if they wanted to set the other way, I'd have them face this way and set this way. Why? Well, because it's a little simple at the beginning, and we can, learn the game without complicating the technique. Okay, there's going to be enough in the players' heads trying to understand how to play the game to start making it really complicated with like back sets and stuff like that. But as they get more comfortable, then I would have them probably face this way all the time, because that's the way they're going to face when they play at the next level and start playing in more complicated systems, and then have them try to back set. So at that point, I would probably move them a little closer to here, right? So they have a bit less distance to set back, and then they could set to the middle and on the outside as well. Okay. So I'll probably do that again for, we have it here, the first 3 events, the first half of the season. It's going to take a while for these players to kind of start getting it for the most part, and then also developing the skills. Because remember, if you want to start setting with front and back sets by February 14th, the week of February 14th during your event, you can't just start working on it here, right? I mentioned that last week in the webinar, but this is what you're going to do here at tournaments. Okay, so you're going to do this for these 3 events here, but that doesn't mean that you should wait to work on setting front and back, right? You're probably starting to work set front and back in practice over here at some point after your first event. You start introducing it a little bit in skill work, then slowly but surely in some little modified games. And then by the time you get here, you're probably doing it in practice here after Christmas. But at the end of your session, you still go back to your regular setter face in front system to prepare for your event, so that by the time you get here, your athletes, they've done it in practice and they're ready to now start thinking about doing it in a game. Okay. So that's what I would do. The other reason I would do this, and I'll move directly to blocking here, is because I believe that at this age, like obviously 4 and 4, blocking is probably not going to be a huge thing. Okay, it may be, but for a lot of players, they're probably not going to be big enough to intervene over the net and actually get a block. But if their setter, when they play setter, they're at the net here, then I think it'd be a great opportunity for them to learn how to read the set of the other team, and being able to start recognizing when the ball goes forward and then following the ball, and when the ball goes backwards and then following the ball. And then as they go, they can also start reading, the trajectory, like the approach of the hitter, and trying to stop in front of them, that kind of stuff. None that it's like important. I would expect that we would expect them to have a lot of blocks, but it could be a way for them to start introducing some of those reading components into their game. Okay. As opposed to have, for example, your setter here and another blocker here, and then you're essentially just staying in front of, wherever your hitter, and you're not reading much and you're not moving much either, right? So I would have a setter in 3. And the other thing is, if I have 3 diggers in the back, I think that at this level, we have a better chance of picking up the ball and getting a rally going than by having only 2 defenders in the back and two at net that don't really touch the ball. So that's kind of how I would do it. Now, that's why I had here single player blocking for the entire season. And then they would progress once they move on to the next stage of early contact. Right. Then in terms of serving, I would expect that some players perhaps serve overhead, but some will start serving underhand at the beginning of the season. But I would have an objective of everybody in the team able to at least get 1 serve or a couple serve in the court overhead at the end of the season. Okay. So I think that's a fair objective. Again, you would have to practice that as you move towards this objective here. But we know that eventually we want to play serve overhead, and it's a good time at this point to try it, especially because you're going to play with a light ball and your court is a little smaller. And I actually would have to double check whether or not we are letting the athletes step in at this level. I'm blanking. But this could be another reason why to also practice it if that's allowed. Okay, because the athletes are more likely to feel successful and be successful. Right. In terms of the service receive, well, I would do a 3-player cup the entire time. I don't really see, if my setter is here, I don't really see any reason not to have 3 players in serve receive. Maybe you'd want 2 if you want to limit the potential conflicts between players. So if I erase this one here and put them here, for example, now there's like less gaps to cover. But again, I like to have this player right here so that the players learn to communicate and actually address the seams as early as possible. Right. Okay. Yeah, so that's that. So I see a question. Let's go to it. Gita, can all players hit? Yes. 4-on-4, all players can hit. There's like no back row. So I know there's a back row here on my court, but that's just because I just drew a volleyball court. I just have a volleyball court. But there's no back row for 4-on-4. Okay. Any questions about a 4-on-4 before I move on to 6-on-6 triple ball? If not, it's okay. We'll be back at the end to answer some of those questions. Okay. So let's move on. Voila. Oh, no, that's TNS. This one. Okay, 6-on-6. So as you can see, we have our triple ball. We have those. Sorry, I'll make this bigger so we can have everything. Okay, so we have our objectives here. Same thing, 3 contacts, hand setting, attack on third. They're still there. Now a little bit more ambitious in terms of the results. Now, as you can see, if you compare it to the end of the season, we were like 80-90 at 4-on-4, and now we kind of go down. Well, that's because the athletes had a break. They may be better and bigger, but they're still now playing 6-on-6, which is a different game. It's a bit faster. There's more court to cover, more players to get confused with. Right? We forget about that, but sometimes we think more people involved is easier, but sometimes it's actually the opposite. The more people involved, the harder it is, because now kids think that the ball should be someone else's. There's more people who can actually take the ball instead of that, right? So it creates more of those conflicts areas, and so it's more complicated. So anyways, these objectives are a little revised, but you would treat them the exact same way as I discussed with 4-on-4. Now for rally ball, 6-on-6, we're playing triple ball. I'll start with serving because it's the most simple one. But at this point, we finished the season before, and we had all players capable of serving the ball overhead in the court at some point during a game, or at least trying it. Now, we would expect that as we start our season in triple ball 6v6, that players would probably continue like that. Okay, so I don't have any specific objectives here. I probably could have written one, such as mix of underhand and overhead serve. But the idea is that by the middle of the season, all of our players are serving overhead. And whether they're successful 90% of the time or 60% of the time, because that is going to increase as you keep going towards the end of the season, where you could probably set some success criteria for the end of the season in terms of like, hey, we want to have this many serves inside of the court at the end as a team, right? Something like that. So very simple for this. What I want to talk about is these 3 things. Okay, setter position, in my opinion, is a really important one. I think there's a lot to learn by for the players, by us coaches, having our team go through different systems. Okay, especially when it comes to the setter position. 6-on-6 triple ball will be the first introduction to 6-on-6 volleyball in our pathway. Okay, So they're going to learn to play as a group, 6 players on the court, and they need to learn how players move in relation to each other, right? They need to learn about front row, back row, right? And they need to learn about penetration when a setter is in the back row, right? Whether they are going to be a setter or not, right? They need to know kind of how it works. Now, triple ball is set up in a way where everybody plays every position. So this is great because they're going to get to experience it, and that's just going to make them even better at understanding how the game works later on once they specialize. Okay. So setter in position 3, to me, is the way to start. And I'm trying to get my players to set from position 1 by the end of the season. Okay. The reason why I want them to set in position 1 by the end of the season, well, it's simple. It means that we have 3 attackers in the front row at all time. And it means that I've trained if I get it, if I can make it there with my team, it means that all my players are now pretty good at pushing a ball out. Maybe not all with the same strength and location and precision, but everybody is capable of making a set in the middle and one that's a bit different, that's a bit further to the outside. And then everyone is also capable of doing a set behind their head to an attacker in position 2. All right, that's where I want to get by them. Okay, they may not be the best. Some players will be better than others. That's normal. But to me, getting all the team to be able to execute those skills is really important. All right. Now I want to mention that in this progression from having my setter in position 3 to setter in position 2 to position 1, like I said, not all players will progress at the same rate on your team, right? Not all teams will progress the same. Not all players in a single team will progress the same. So you have to remember that you have a fair play at triple ball. So when you consider the systems for your team, especially in something like setter position, right? Not so much with defense and serve receive, I would say, but for setter position, you could technically have a system for your first line and a system for your second line, for example, if you wanted to do this. If there was like a very big difference between, one half of your players and the other half, right? There's no problem with that. Just go with wherever your players are at. So anyways, setter in 3, okay? Let's just look at it here. I like this little tool. Sorry. No, that's not what I want to do. I just want to move this. All right. I mean, the little like screen, Zoom screen is in the way. Okay. So everybody, oops, sorry. Everybody's probably familiar with setter in 3, but let's just review it just for fun. Okay. Sorry for that. No technical difficulty. I'm back. Okay. So setter in 3. Anyone wants me to go through these? I'm just like thinking now, I just looked at the time and I'm thinking maybe I could get back to it at the end if people have some specific questions about this. I will just do that because I want to cover the content before the hour. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so anyways, setter in 3. Okay, as a triple ball, I'm in 3. So again, I can either face each way. You can decide that, or you can have the players set front and set back. Advantage of that is you can split your court, split the net, and have attackers hit at both pins. Okay, which is a great thing for your offense. You progress from that to setter in position 2 because over here you've trained your setters to be stronger and be able to push that ball all the way out to the antenna so that they can set left side from position 2. While you're in this phase, it's short, okay, you're losing the back set, okay, because your setter is in position 2. But I think the benefits of being able to set a middle and the left side are going to be great in the end once you reintroduce the back set, okay, when you go back to your setter in position 1. All right, so that's how I would do it. You would probably want in some of your drills to start working on having your setter come in from position 1, right? So you could be working on setting, but the way that you do it, for example, I'll give you an example here. If you're doing like a setter drill, let's say you've split your cord because you're working on skills, and you have a target here, and you have a passer here, okay, and you have someone with a ball over here tossing, okay. Well, maybe you train with your setter, coming from here and having to penetrate, so before they make a set, right? So the ball comes, they pass it, but your setters start from here. They didn't just start at the net waiting for the ball. You didn't just have like your setter here waiting for the ball. All right. So you could start like including some of those elements of penetration for your in your drills all the way over here. Anytime you work on skills, so that your setters and your players are eventually ready for this. Okay, highly recommend it. Now, in terms of defense, okay, 6 up versus 6 up or 6 back. I'm a fan of transitioning the athletes to a 6 back as soon as possible, even though that means that we're going to get scored a lot on tips. But when we have this formation here, so with a 6 up, okay, our position 6 here, then our defender is position 5 and 1 a little bit further. They're responsible for the back, and then our position 6 is kind of responsible for the middle stuff. It just helps, especially as you begin the season and athletes are figuring out their hits. A lot of them will, again, be afraid to hit. They may just tip to the middle or set the ball over to the middle. So it will help you keep the rally going by having your position 6 player here. Now, I think that it's possible to pick up those balls by playing a 6 back and just like teaching your players to read the game. But this is something that you can kind of like transition to as you move forward in your season. Okay, so that would look like this. You would have your position 6 here, okay, and then your 5 and 1 closer to the T, okay, like a traditional 6 back. In this case, it would be these players here were kind of responsible for the tips, or even like your pin blockers. Okay, so transitioning from a 6 front from 6 back could be a winning strategy with your triple team. Then in terms of so in terms of serve receive, okay, serve receive, we have a progression here of 5-player W to a 4-player cup to a 3-player cup. 3-player cup is the objective because this is how teams pass the ball, at the higher level, and not even like at the higher level, but like at 14, 15U, this is how most teams will pass the ball. Okay, this is where we want to get to. So let's get to that. But let's get to that by, again, working with what we have and making sure that our players are comfortable. Okay, so our 5-player W works well here with our setter in position 3, and that's why they last the exact same amount of time. When we have our setter in position 3, we have our setter here in 3, and then we will have our other players. We'll have 2 over here, 1 over here, 6 over here, 5 over here, and 4 over here, which gives us a W. All right. So if you have something like this, while you're playing with your setter in 3, everything is going to work, and you're going to be able to get all your players involved in serve receive and probably cover more of the court as your players learn to move to the ball and communicate. Okay. Again, lots of players means lots of conflicts, potential conflicts, so lots of communication between players that's required. And then we would move once we get to setter in 2. Okay, so once we get to setter in 2, we would get to a 4-player 4-player cup. So we would have our middle position 3 here, our left side passing here shorter, and 5, 6, and 1, and some sort of cup here covering the court. All right, pretty typical stuff. So that would be kind of the transition where you go from 5 to 4, and then oops, I don't know if that happens. I don't know what I did. Sorry, I'm doing this on an iPad. It's connected to my computer, but then I lose it. So anyways, okay, we get the principle. So that's what I would do here. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat, so I'm going to move on to TNS, and then I'll get back to questions. Okay. So finally, traditional and specialized, right here. As you can see, we still have 3 contacts and hand setting stats. The one thing that's different here is set distribution. Okay, so set distribution, I would like to see teams use the right side more. I think we don't use the right side a lot in Ontario, the younger ages, and not just the younger ages, sorry, but like even once we get to like 15, 16, 17 when we have statted games in the past at Ontario Championships, right side is one of the sets that's kind of left behind. We do set a lot of left side. Okay, so I would encourage you to stat your set distribution so that you can look at it with your players and say, hey, we play almost all of our balls to the left side. Can we set more balls to the middle? Can we have an objective of setting a certain number of balls to the middle and then a certain number of balls to the right side? Now, this progression here as part of traditional and specialized is it's a little progression. It essentially is shifting 10% of balls to the left side to the right side. Okay, so we have 50-20, left side, right side, and we want to get to 40-30. Why? Well, because I think that at the beginning of the season, as you go through, a 6-6 and then like moving on to, potentially a faster game, it may be useful to, not put too much stress on the athletes to set the back set. Okay, so set it a little bit, we learn to get comfortable with it. But as we get to, our 6-3, and now we are specializing a little bit more. So our setters now are probably the best of our setters because we've chosen them as part of our roster to be the 3 setters on the court. Well, then perhaps we can start setting better or more ambitious objectives in terms of setting right side. Okay. So speaking of defensive system, the TNS rules mandate that you play a 6-6 for the first 2 events, so you don't have a choice. The first half of your season, it's going to be 6-6. Okay. Again, that doesn't mean you're not going to be working on the next offensive system you will play, right? Which will be a 6-3. So what does that mean? Well, 6-6 means you're going to have 6. Everybody sets. It's like triple ball, right? Let me see if I can erase all of this. Okay. So it's like triple ball. So if your setter is in position 1, well, then everyone who plays through position 1 is going to be your setter. Okay. Now a 6-3, you're moving from having 6 setters on the court at the same time to having 3 setters on the court at the same time. Normally, your setters will play, the players will be in a setting position when they are in position either 2 or 1 or 1 and 6. Okay. And what your rotation looks like, you essentially have a setter, a hitter, a setter, a hitter, a setter, and a hitter. And what happens is that this setter here, right, will be in position 2 and 1. Let's say they're going to be the setter when they're there. And while they do this, this setter is going to be in this position and this position. So when this setter here is now in this position, this one is over here, and they can do 2 and 1 again, right? So it's kind of how it works. Now, what that means is that you're going to go from having everyone set on your team, you're going to have 12 setters, and now all of a sudden you're going to have potentially 6 setters if you have 12 athletes on your team, because you have fair play and you're playing 2 sets. So that means that you need 3 setters for your first roster, your first lineup, and 3 setters for your second lineup. Okay, so you still have a lot of setters, still very little specialization. Okay, but it's going to be a bit more complicated to do than the 6-6. Players are going to have to be aware of kind of where they are on the court and their role when they are in different positions. After that, well, we want to end with a 6-2. What does that mean? Well, that means that whoever's in the front row is an attacker. Whoever's in the back row, okay, actually, not everyone will be a setter in the back row, but you've got your 2 setters that are opposite. And then when one of them is in the back row, they're the setter. And then when it comes to the front row and the other one comes to the back, they become the setter. All right, a very simple system that will allow you to finish the season with 4 setters, which is a great way to actually transition into 15U when you're going to want to probably at that point pick 2 or 3 setters to be the setters you're going to move forward with on your team as you go all the way to 18U. All right. A very good system to get to know your players and get to know who plays well, what strengths and weaknesses your players have, so that you can actually end the season with the 4 setters that make the most sense. This is great at this level because we tend to put the smaller players in the setting position. Sometimes we, as coaches, will even pick perhaps the least athletic player on our team because let's say they're not as good at hitting and at other positions that are scoring points. And so we do that, but by doing that, we miss some opportunities to get some players who may have a really good head for being a setter, right? And we don't know that unless they've had a chance to explore and to play a couple of events in that position, right? So this will help you actually figure out who will probably be your best setters as you move forward with that team all the way to 18U. In defense at that point, we're playing a 6-back. Okay, so we've established that at triple ball 6-on-6, and now we're keeping that, and we're going to play this for the rest of the time. With some modifications, obviously, we're going to play some read defense. Teams are going to have some specific systems around defense that you're going to do, where you move them in different ways depending on what the attacking threat is, but that is something that is completely up to you. Serve receive. There's a kind of a regression here. We're going back to 4-player cup here for the first one. I'm not sure that's necessary, but I thought it could be for some players as you play a 6-6, and then the game's a little bit faster. So it could be something that you do at the beginning, but if you feel like your players are ready to go, just go into a 3-cup right away, even though you're playing a 6-6. It really doesn't matter. Like the thing is, if you're playing your 6-6, again, you're going to have to decide where your setting position is. And if you choose your setter to be in position 1, if you choose your setter to be in position 1, then that means you're going to have your position 2, especially passing here. You're going to have your position 6, 5. And oftentimes the player opposite to the setter is position 4 and it's kind of isolated here. But I don't see why not at this level. You could just include your player here as you play your 6-6 with setter in 1 for the first part of your season. If you wanted to, you could have better athletes. Now, I don't think this is showing on the court now. So I'm sorry, I just drew stuff and you can't see it. It's not working. Oh, there it is. So I was saying that you have like 4 here oftentimes, but that why not have it right here? Okay. Last thing, blocking, spread versus semi-bunch. The only thing I have to say here is I know at players are 14U, they're playing traditional and specialized. We're getting closer to 15U and we're going to start blocking. We're blocking now at 14U. It's starting to become more of a thing where we get blocks. So, if we want to, I was thinking about a progression, I would probably do something where, my blockers are kind of facing their hitters more. So they have less to cover, but they can still, I would really work on my middle to start learning how to follow the set and going close to the outside. So at the beginning, I wouldn't want the outside players to be too close to the middle, just to avoid some collisions. I would want them to have perhaps less reading to make for the moment, but at least have that middle, have a visual reference here as an outside, right, to go kind of block against. And then as the season goes on and the players getting better at blocking, I would probably start to bring them a little bit closer, but not too much, like kind of a semi-bunch. And then have the expectation that when the setter is setting in the middle, those players are coming to block, as a triple block in the middle as well. So not only the middle is going to the outside, but now also the outsides are going to the middle. Okay, and that's going to help if they get closer, and by then they're probably also better, so they can take that step or couple of steps to get to the outside if their player is set. Okay. Yeah, and then for serving, I would have all servers obviously playing overhead. I think traditional and specialized would be a great time to start introducing players to a jump serve. So an objective could be to have everyone able to do a jump serve in a competition. Maybe they don't do it all the time, but at least everyone has tried it. That would probably be one of my objectives there for serving for traditional and specialized, because again, as they move forward to 15, 16, etc., having a jump serve is probably going to be a weapon that they want to develop. Okay. So yeah, that's that. Kind of flew through that last piece, but I want it to be done in an hour. If you need to go, I see some questions. I will go and read this and answer them. Please feel free. Oh, first question is a great question. Where can the templates be found? So let's go together, and I will put the link in the description. OntarioVolleyball.org. Now, I will admit it's kind of a maze, but so pay attention, and then we'll get there together. I just have when I present like this on Zoom, and it is a bit slow, so please bear with me. Okay. Indoor competition under players and parents. Scroll down. Early contact initiative. Click on that. Once you're here, you go down and you will have a button for each stream. If you pick 4-on-4 rally ball, you click more information, you're going to get to the 4v4 page. And here on the right, you will have the resources. So you have the season plan template, you have the guide. So it's a multi-page document that walks you through how it works. And there's a short video summarizing everything. And yeah. And then the recording of the webinar we did is back here, I believe. So anyways, I will share this with you in the chat. One second, everyone. Voila. Okay, in traditional and specialized, which position would you start setting from? And progress to position 1. So I kind of briefly mentioned it, but so in TNS, we're starting with a 6-6. I kind of mentioned that I would probably start in setter in 1, especially since at the end of our triple ball season, we were doing setter in 1. Now, if you have new players, you could start with your setter in 2 and then progress to setter in 1 very rapidly, maybe after the first event. But I would definitely try to get to setter in 1 as soon as possible. Just because then once we move to 6-3 and a 6-2, this is what we're going to do. We're going to prioritize a back row setter. Personally, once we get to 6-3, I would probably choose a system where like this, a system where we have the setter set when they're in position 1 and 6, right? So that we have always 3 attackers at the net. Okay, so I want to progress to that as soon as possible. So I would start a season at TNS with setter in 1, provided my athletes are comfortable with that and they understand. All of them understand the penetration from 1 to the net, not just on serve receive, but also in defense, because that's more complicated, right? Coming from the back to the net on serve receive is one thing, but then being in defense and being able to read, oh, the ball's coming over, I need to go to the net and not bump into my players backing up from the net. That's not easy. It's actually harder. So if they were good at this and had done it before, that's what I would do. For TNS, are we allowed to specialize middles at the end of the season? So that's a great question. What you're saying is essentially by the end of the season, if I play 6-2 and I've got, I need to visualize this for you guys. If we're playing a 6-2 and I've got my setter in one, setter here, and I've got, technically I would have, right? Normally I would have a left side here, right? I would have a right side here, and I would have a middle here from my front row. And what you're saying is that, can we specialize them like this? So can you switch after the serve? Is that what you're asking, Raf? Sorry. I don't know if you're still there.
Yeah, so I guess
Oh
if
yeah,
you're able to like specialize a setter for 6-2. So when they rotate to the front row, they become a middle and they play full-time middle. The 3 rotations, they're in the front row. Are you allowed to do that or not allowed to do that?
yeah. So it's a really good question. I have to look at the rules. I don't remember talking about this specifically. I want to say that the intention of the TNS is to say, okay, well, you're setting here, so then whoever's in the front row will play wherever they are, right? So that person may not be whatever left side, but they're gonna play right side here now, like the entire point, right? And then when your setter rotates, and now this guy goes here, and this guy's here. Well, now this one's a middle, and this one's a right side, right? Because they're moving. So I would say that, but you know what? I'm going to talk to the staff, see what we have in the rules, and make sure that that's clear, because I can see that being an issue if it's not clear. Yeah, good question.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. So end of the day, it's if you're gonna run a 6-2, they just hit wherever they are rotation wise. Is that what I'm understanding?
For now, yes,
Okay.
because essentially the rules say no specialization other than progressing to a 6-2. Now a 6-2 usually, like it's like semi-specialized.
Yeah.
So I just need to go back to the team and make sure that we're all, I don't want to say like this is how it is, and then
Okay.
yeah, and then we talk, and then yeah. So I'll go back to the group.
Okay. So
But thanks for your question, Rav. That's yeah, really appreciate it.
No problem.
Those are the things that those are the great questions that it's awesome that we get before we get started. So thanks. When did a player sub in on 4-4 after the serve in position 6? I thought it was like rec ball. Yeah, pretty much. So if I go back to the graph here, in 4-4, you're going to have your players here. Let's call them, I don't know, A, B, C, D. All right, and E is right here on the side. They're on the bench. Well, the team wins the point. B goes to serve, for example, and then after their serve, they get out, and then E replaces them over here, so that we would have E. Okay. Right, you get the point. Now B's over here, A, and then I forget D and C, right? So that's how the rotation goes. So you always get out after your serve. Are we allowed to shift defense in traditional and specialized so we could have setter in position 1, be pushed up closer to the net by position 2 so we could work on 3-person cup defense? Yes. Yeah, so again, I think that's Craig. Great question. I'm going to draw this up here and you correct me if I got this wrong. But your question is, ooh, I need a bigger eraser. Okay. can you do setter in one by having your setter like somewhere here, and then you kind of have your position two, let's say here, isolated, not passing, and then have your 6, 5, and 4 like this. All right. If that's what you mean, then yes, no problem. The idea though is that you're going to have this formation at all time. So once you know, like you have your other setter, that's what you do. Now, actually, I take that back. If you wanted to shift and then it's not working for you, you just, you know, you want to go back and have your position two passing now, that's no problem. Just move them around. At the end of the day, it's going to be the system that you play. So that's fine. Yeah, so Kelvin sent me a direct message. He says the summary chart says partial specialization, but not mandatory. So that's correct, right? You don't have to have partial specialization. You don't have to get to a 60. That's what I would recommend. But if your players are not there yet, then don't get to it. If you want to do a full year of 6-6, that's fine too. Right? You can justify that depending on your team, right? And what your objectives are. Yeah, you don't have to do any type of specialization at TNS. For Calvin asks, do you start a lineup where you finished the previous set in match for 4v4? I don't think there's a specific rule about that. Personally, as a coach, I would probably do that just because, you know, if you were the next player to go on the court, it's kind of nice to be the next player on court, you know, even if it's after a break between sets. So yes, I think that's a good idea. Why not? Okay. So thanks for your questions, everybody. And thanks for being on this webinar. I will record this, and actually let me show you where it's going to be. If you want to just hang with me, I will actually stop this recording, and then I will show you. Okay. So thanks for everybody who watched, and if you have any questions, you can email me at lpmainville@ontariovolleyball.org. I would be very, very happy to have some discussions about this with you. Okay. So thanks.